is sort of a summary of what this letter is all about. And this morning I want to offer us a few thoughts in response to this season of life that we're in right now. In the life of the church, we are in the Easter season. Even though Easter is now a few weeks behind us, we may have forgotten that resurrection is what is our focus now. And resurrection is that very thing that drives all that we do. Actually, just a few verses before this, and I would really encourage you to go find this book this week and maybe this letter. It's only 4 chapters, and go read it. But the very beginning of this particular chapter you just heard, chapter 3, it begins this way. Therefore, if you were raised with Christ, look for things, live into things that are from above. Remember in high school, in middle school, I did this little thing called social, or I know in some areas it's called cotillion. And even here in Atlanta, I know there's some folks in this neighborhood that try to gather around and get middle school students to get together and learn some of the social properness of our day. They learn how to dance sometimes, they learn etiquette around the dinner table and these sorts of things. And I was involved with that while I was in Augusta. And I guess I learned a few things from that, hopefully. Maybe some of you sit around tables with me, you see I'm not completely a pig when it comes to eating and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things I learned the most about was my peers. My peers that we would ride in carpool together with, we would run along the road, and I'll never forget being in the back of this one car. This is what was momentous to me about this time of my life and working and going through social classes, cotillion classes. I remember sitting in the back of this car, the radio came on, and all my friends in the car started singing, "Shot through the heart, and you're to blame. You give love that name." All right. That's what I learned in social. I was so longing to be able to sing the songs of the day with my peers. And I learned Bon Jovi by heart. Man, it was awesome. That was the age where I was, and I was living into all the pop culture music I could. And Bon Jovi was always what I played. So great. A couple of you in here were very kind to take Ann and I along to a concert here in Atlanta a couple of years ago. And we were, he still sings okay, but anyway. So, the point of the story, though, is these songs, they captured me in all that I was, and they began to create a heartbeat of how I lived and operated, and what I thought of, and what I longed for. It was interesting listening to the songs of the pop culture of the day. I began to see things that they were longing for and desiring. Matter of fact, at one point I started listening to some songs and thinking, these love songs, these kind of passion songs, could almost be sung to God if you change some of the words out. I started realizing the significance of what music does for us in our life. And this morning, knowing this was George's last Sunday, I started thinking about passages of Scripture that would well articulate what it is that we do week in and week out in this service of worship. We choose music on purpose because it moves us. It drops to a deeper place and point in our life and can say things and do things that we don't fully understand. And they move beyond the intellectual. They transcend these parts of us and even transcend culture. I remember going on a mission trip to Thailand years ago when I was in college and walking into a worship service the first week I was there, and they sang Amazing Grace. I knew the tune. I didn't know the words they were singing, but I knew the words that I was singing. And it transcended those cultures and those understandings and those things. It pushed me to a deeper level. It had power in what it said and did. In this resurrection season, that's what we're about. We're about this thing called God's love and power and resurrection that moves and drives us in a way that is beyond comprehension sometimes. It moves us in such a way that we begin to see and realize there are pieces that shape us and move us and cause us to live. If you'll notice in this passage of Scripture, actually it starts to describe some of these characteristics of who and what His love is from Jesus. You actually heard it. Let me just remind you of a few of the words. It actually invites us to put these things on in our life. This morning you got ready to be here and worship, and so you chose the clothes you have on. They it begins to show something. And this passage of Scripture invites us, as it did this early church that Paul was writing to, it invited them to live in such a way to put on the power of this resurrection. And words like compassion and kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, and forgiveness. These are very different words than what we hear from our culture day in and day out, are they not? We hear words like striving and attaining and succeeding and getting, sometimes even to the expense of other people around us, to the expense of relationships or community or those things that might be more important and more valuable. And so, see, the power at play in our world is not a power of love and grace and redemption. Oftentimes, it's a power of selfishness and greed and our own things. And we do that very easily. It's natural for us. So that's why these words of encouragement to us are to say, how will we be people who live in this resurrected idea, in this resurrected life, in this practice? These are things we have to put on. We have to be intentional. We have to think about, what tie will I choose? What shoes will I put on? How will this sweater look with that shirt? We have to be intentional as we think about our day. Are you intentional in putting on these types of gifts of the Spirit? These types of gifts of God's love, the power of God's love in your every single day life? Because that's what the resurrection teaches us, is that we don't have to live that way anymore. There's not a way of living that exists we're caught up in. There's a whole other way of operating, a living, resurrected, life eternal way of being. And it comes down to a choice. When I met George in July of 2010, first arriving here at church, I was very grateful that he sort of kind of knew the lay of the land. I was really appreciative that George kind of understood this place a little bit, even though he'd only been here 6 months before I got here. But he knew something about this community, this culture, the music. Those words that I just read to you exhibit who George is. I'll never forget, every single week we start meeting, we start talking about worship every single week. We talk about the service and how does it all go together, how does it fit, what's the choir going to do, what's specials, and how's the organ going to sound, or this piano, or this instrument, or whatever. And we would talk and plan and discuss. And eventually I kind of kept coming back to my same 10 or 15 songs that I like. And you'll notice those weeks in worship when those are my songs, but that's what I like to choose. But George was so good about doing like we did in the first song this morning. He wants you to hear and to understand the language that's behind the music. The words that speak something to us and variations on music and how that speaks to our soul. There's power within the midst of that. And it's an exhibition of the love of God in the midst of music and how it moves us. That's why the conclusion of this says that the way we're supposed to do this together is that we are to teach and admonish and strengthen each other by singing songs and hymns and spiritual songs. Kind of like I did in the back of that car in middle school. Song begins to capture who you are, begins to define your life, and begins to move you in such a way. George, you have done that. You've selected these pieces for us. And people, you'll walk out here sometimes, and you won't realize what it is, but there's a tune in your heart. There's a tune in your mind that's captured you. It isn't subtle little things, but it is drawing you closer in worship to God, because that's what this is intended to do. That's what this worship is about. That's what these songs, these hymns do for us. That's what the power of God's love does for us. One of my other favorite songs is the song Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News. Once again, a song as you begin to play it and sing it in your head, I invite you to think about some of the lyrics, about what the power might be if this was sung to God, or sung about God's love. Now granted, the song is written about a love or a man or a woman or a people or how that might look. But listen to just a few of these words and see if these aren't true of the power of God's love in your own life. sometimes it really frustrates us. This is my favorite one. The first time you feel it, it might make you sad. The next time you feel it, it might make you mad. God's love does that to us sometimes, doesn't it? Sometimes we hear something, we're like, oh, I don't like that. Sometimes it pushes and challenges us. I don't like that either. But then you'll be glad when you found it. Because it's the power of that love that makes the world go round. So many people have tried in our life. So many people in our world make efforts at understanding the power of love. The catch is we miss it because we haven't experienced the full resurrection power of God's grace in the life and person of Jesus of Nazareth. And in this Easter season, as you hear music, as you experience the power of that rhythm and cadence and harmony, those elements that move you, may you be reminded of the power of the greatest love that's ever been known. And may your life sing. May your life sing God's love and God's grace that's been given to you and been given to the world. And the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Choosing celebration, breaking into freedom. You're the song of our hearts. We cast aside our shadows, trust you with our sorrows. You're the song of our hearts. Dancing to the rhythm of your heart. We're rising from the ashes to the stars. You're the joy, light in my soul. The joy